Hello and welcome to everyone. My name is Brigitte Kaufmann and I'm actually very happy that this webinar on pastoralism and climate change attracts a lot of audience this afternoon. Overall, we have 223 registrations. So thank you all for joining us today. At the German Institute of Tropical and Subtropical Agriculture, we focus on transdisciplinary research, particularly through close collaboration with pastoralists from Eastern Africa. A lot of our work is geared towards understanding why pastoralists do what they do. This perspective was led to a meanwhile more than a decade-long collaboration and exchange with Saverio Krätli. I see Saverio dedicating his professional life and a lot of his energy on letting the scientific and also the development world understand pastoralism, particularly to change still dominant narratives that pastoral systems are traditional or even outdated. The policy brief on pastoralism and climate change is a good example for this. While a common narrative is that pastoral systems are hard hit by climate change, we see from the analysis from Saverio that this view actually overlooks the strengths and particular features of pastoral land use. Through their mobile land use, pastoralists harness variability and are hence much better placed to deal with climate change than other agricultural systems. As all agricultural systems are affected by climate change, we can hence also look at pastoral systems in order to learn how they deal with it in order to be better prepared for the future. This policy brief is a priority item on the action list of the Coalition of European lobbies for Eastern African pastoralism, CELEP. It has been funded by the German Development Cooperation GIZ, and it is now used by CELEP to support the International Year of Rangeland and Pastoralism. The event today will be facilitated by Michael Ochieng Odhiambo. Michael is an independent consultant based in Kenya, and his work focuses on strengthening policies and institutional and legal frameworks to secure land and resource rights to pastoralists, indigenous people, and other resource-dependent communities. Please, Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to this webinar. You have all received the program, and to start us off, you're going to hear from three other individuals, all of whom I think most of us are familiar with. First, we'll have Tobias who is the advisor for animal husbandry at GIZ, and then Anthony, who is the CELEP coordinator, and then we'll have Mariam Nyamirfula from the International Year of the Rangelands and Pastoralists, in that order. So Tobias, please, and then Anthony, and then Mariam, and then we'll move on to the presentation. Tobias?
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, to give me the word. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak here on behalf of GIZ. So as Michael already mentioned, I'm working for GIZ's headquarters in Eschborn near Frankfurt as an advisor for animal husbandry, and I was amongst those who commissioned Saverio Krätli to compile this policy brief we want to discuss this afternoon. And I'm very happy about the great participation in this event. Just I'm happy to see some familiar faces, or at least to read many familiar names among the participants. On the one hand, this shows the importance of this topic, pastoralism and climate change, but also the interest it obviously arouses when an organization like GIZ, the German Development Cooperation, takes on this topic. For many years, this might not have been always the case. Well, as far as I know, and I myself have only been working for GIZ for less than 3 years now. This has been somehow different in the past when GIZ was still called GTZ, and various projects also had a clear focus on pastoral target groups and needs. But we as GIZ, and this is very important to point out, we also have to act according to the existing political interest, especially of our German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the so-called BMZ, Bundesministerium für wirtschaftliche Zusammenarbeit und Entwicklung in German. We act mainly on behalf of BMZ, it is officially called. It is true that in recent years, this political interest has increasingly focused on smallholder farmers, mostly crop, but also agropastoral systems, whereas the classical, let's say, extensive pastoral systems, on the other hand, have been somewhat neglected. And this, of course, has an impact also on the political focus here in Germany, because without a clear vote for precisely this target group already within GIZ, and we are talking about an institution of more than 22,000 employees worldwide, and of course there are many different opinions and meanings, and not all know the value and importance and strength of pastoral systems. Many see them critical, of course. Yeah, for them, they seem to be unproductive, uninnovative, too backward. You know these arguments. And of course, if there's not a clear line, even within GIZ, it's even more difficult to draw a clear line to our ministry and from there to German development policy. However, I can say that this is now slowly beginning to change, at least in parts. Mobile pastoral systems, especially on the African continent, are once again moving more into the focus of political interest. However, they are mainly doing so in the context of crisis and conflicts interlinked with political insecurity and the risk of capture by extremist groups. In this context, the recently published synthesis report by Resort Bilidal Marobé, I think most of you know what I'm speaking about, this synthesis report here, listening to herders in West Africa and the Sahel, what is the future for pastoralism in the context of rising insecurity, has also attracted attention at the BMZ, at our ministry. There too, in our Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, pastoralism is beginning to be somehow rediscovered as an important topic for development cooperation, and hopefully not only as a vulnerable system, susceptible to crisis, but as a substantial economic system with a huge agroecological potential and traditionally climate resilience. So speaking shortly about climate and climate change, on the other hand, this has been a very important cross-cutting issue on the work of German development cooperation for many years now, and it will become even more important in the future. This is to be expected with our new German government and also our new Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development. So it seems now that it is a good timing to bring together these two very important issues, pastoralism and climate change, as we want to do it now when discussing this policy brief. And I want to use really this opportunity to thank a lot Saverio for his help and support, supporting us to bring our initially very vague ideas to paper. I also want to use the opportunity to thank Christine Lotje, who's with us in this call as well, freelance consultant who also supported this process right from the beginning. So coming to an end, let's hope that this policy brief on pastoralism and resilience of food production and the face of climate change, it is called, at least right now, in this draft version, we still have to point this out, there's still a draft version, can make some contribution to the political agenda setting in German development cooperation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Tobias. And not just in German development cooperation, but also for all other actors involved, because this is really current and urgent and important. We shall now have Anthony speaking on behalf of CELEP. Anthony.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony. I'm the coordinator of CELEP, the coalition of European lobbies for East African pastoralism. So for those who don't know CELEP that much, it's an informal advocacy group of European organizations and specialists partnering up with East African pastoralist organizations and specialists. And since CELEP aims to combine forces to advocate for the recognition and support of East African pastoralists or pastoralism, We are very happy to co-organize this webinar, and with CELEP, we are also very interested to build further upon this policy draft to develop our own policy brief that will be adapted to the local context in East Africa. So once again, welcome everyone to this webinar on pastoralists and climate change.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Brief and to the point. And I'll now invite Mariam Nyamir-Fulla to speak to how this is linked to what we are all struggling on getting the agenda into the global mainstream. Nyamir, welcome.
Michael, I don't think Mariam's online.
Okay.
If you want, I can say a couple of words instead.
I think that would be lovely. That would be lovely, Anne.
Okay. Yeah, I welcome all of you to this seminar. Mariam, as the Vice Chair of the International Support Committee for the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists campaign, would have loved to have welcomed you to this. I'm also part of that committee, but not at such a high level. We really welcome this paper, this learning brief that Saverio and colleagues at GIZ have developed together. And we fully endorse it. And we feel that this is a really, really important step towards the celebration and the better understanding of rangelands and pastoralism as we build up to what we hope will be a United Nations General Assembly endorsement of the International Year to take place in 2026. And because there's building going on in our house, I will now stop and hand over back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I'm sure all of us are involved in one way or another in pushing to get the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralism on board. It's time for us now to listen to Saverio. Saverio specializes in pushing the margins of narrative, and it's always challenging to listen to him. And this brief, I think, comes at really an appropriate moment, and I think that's the reason why all of us are here. The link between pastoralism and climate change is a conversation that's going on for a long time. I think what Saverio brings onto the table is to look at it differently. Instead of going through with the normal narratives about how climate change is bad for pastoralism and how pastoralists are going to suffer, I think Saverio wants us to look at how pastoralists are probably even better placed than all other livelihood systems to actually deal with pastoralism. Saverio, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. I wonder whether I could have my slides. Yes, thank you very much. This brief has been produced with input from Christine Lotche, as you've heard, and Friedrich Mikulka, and Wiebke Fersch, and of course, Tobias. First slide, please. Okay, there is a general agreement that the agricultural systems working most closely with nature are also those most vulnerable to its vagaries, and therefore those most vulnerable to climate change, especially rain-fed farming and pastoral systems in Africa. On the other hand, by this logic, the most resilient systems are those in which production has been emancipated from nature. That is, where the vagaries of nature have been externalized from the production cycle by means of intensive inputs of energy and resources. We must keep in mind, however, that resilience to climate change refers to unprecedented climate variability that humanity will have to live with once global warming has been stopped. That is, successfully stopped before it triggers runaway climate change. Runaway climate change describes a scenario in which one or more critical tipping points in the Earth's natural systems have been triggered by global warming, making climate change much faster and harder to stop. In other words, a global catastrophe scenario that is imperative to avoid. Global average temperature has already increased by over 1 degree centigrade. And this year's assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that the anthropogenic increase in temperature will reach 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2040 at the latest. Beyond that threshold, the risk of precipitating runaway climate change increases sharply. Therefore, when talking of the resilience of food production in the face of climate variability, the challenge is, first of all, not to remain on the current trajectory to run away climate change. That is, find a way to resilience that does not depend on the intensive inputs of energy and resources that are responsible for anthropogenic global warming. A way that does not depend on an impossible separation from nature. Next slide. Pastoralism is such a way. Pastoralists are specialists in managing uncertainty. They can achieve relatively stable food production from an unpredictable climate, and they can do that sustainably. Eating a world reshaped by unprecedented climate variability will be less unfamiliar to pastoralists than to the food systems that depend on climate stability or on creating artificially stable environments with unsustainable energy inputs. Next. In pastoralism, a relatively stable level of production can be achieved by working with nature rather than by separating from it. How? By adopting production strategies and operational processes that are variable enough to match the variability of potential inputs from the natural environment. In other words, by changing at the same pace with nature. Pastoral systems are found in some of the most extreme environments worldwide, on about 70% of the rangelands, or a fifth of the world's land surface. Even despite chronic underinvestment, pastoralism's contribution to agricultural GDP in sub-Saharan Africa averages 40%, often supplying the bulk of meat for both domestic markets and exports. Next. As these systems make only negligible use of cereals as feed and only negligible use of external inputs based on fossil fuels, they are amongst the most efficient in the world in sustainably producing human edible proteins. When pastoral systems are allowed to operate according to their own logic, their emissions are equivalent to the natural carbon cycles they mimic and replace. Next. The brief proposes a way of operationalizing the IPCC risk framework for a pastoralist context. As the ecological and social dimensions are inextricably linked, we need to talk of social ecological resilience. And as pre-existing non-climate stressors are the main cause of vulnerability to natural hazards, focusing only on climate would inevitably preempt the analysis. There is time only for 3 highlights. Next. A risk framework for a pastoralist context, and more widely for the assessment of future disaster risk and coping capacities in Africa, needs to explicitly acknowledge uncertainty. That is where the probabilities of future outcomes are not known and cannot be estimated. Next. With regard to both anthropogenic climate change and natural variability, it is the context that matters to pastoralist households. Therefore, data that are most needed and currently missing are those on interannual and multi-annual variability of rainfall at the lowest scales in space and time, including rainfall's interaction with highly specific variables such as biodiversity, soil, or terrain that only local people can understand and act upon. Next. Finally, it is necessary to take on board that pastoralist exposure to climate change and natural variability is not given. Instead, Their exposure depends on their capacity to make use of mobility as a key strategy, as well as the institutional means available for implementing it, especially access rights to grazing opportunities. Let me conclude with the brief's 4 key messages. Next. Climate resilience is of value only if it does not lead to global catastrophe. Resilience in the face of climate variability does not have to be at the cost of remaining on the current trajectory to run away climate change. Resilience can be gained from embedding flexibility in the production systems so as to match the unpredictable changes in the operating conditions. In this regard, pastoralism offers important lessons. Next. Variability in the ways of operating, especially mobility, is therefore crucial to pastoralist adaptive capacity. Pastoralist specialist resilience in making use of unpredictable environments is based on keeping options open. Variability is embedded in the operational systems and in the operational processes and institutional arrangement so that they can be rapidly adapted to short notice changes in the external conditions. Mobility remains pivotal to this logic. Next. Addressing non-climate stressors is key to climate resilience. The analysis of climate vulnerability in pastoralism and small-scale agricultural systems must include non-climate stressors, as they are often the primary cause also of climate vulnerability. Promoting climate resilience starts, therefore, from removing the legacy of non-climate stressors that undermine it and that push producers towards conventional, unsustainable forms of resilience based on separating agriculture from nature. Next. Finally, small-scale rain-fed agricultural systems, and especially pastoralism, might be the world's best bet in the face of the imperative to avoid runaway climate change. Pastoralism shows that resilience to climate variability is possible even without the energy-intensive solutions that keep the planet on the current trajectory to run away climate change. Today, this lesson has relevance well beyond pastoralism and the drylands. Supporting pastoral systems while improving the understanding of the ways they function is a crucial step on the pathway to developing sustainable resilience of food production in the face of the climate change and related uncertainty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saverio. And it looks like we're gaining time, which is great because that will just give us more time for the discussions at the end of this session. Now, this next session, we're going to hear from 6 individuals, all of whom individually and within the framework of the institutions are actively involved in advancing this agenda, both from pastoralist livelihoods perspective, but also from a climate change perspective. The 6 individuals are respectively Sadia Ahmed, who works with the Pastoral and Environmental Network in the Horn of Africa, PENHA, and is based in Hargeisa. Abdul Kadir Ma, who is the Director of Partnership for Pastoralist Development Association, PAPDA, based in Ethiopia. Shoba Liban works with the Pastoral Women for Health and Education, PWHE, which is a Kenyan NGO. Hussein Wario, the Director of the Center for Research and Development in Drylands, CRDD, also based in Kenya. Veronique Anse is CRAD visiting scientist on pastoralism at FAO, and Camilla Tolmin is with us. Camilla is the former director of the IIED, and it is a pleasure always to have Camilla on board, and I'm looking forward to interesting interventions from these 6, and we'll start with Sadia. You all have your times set, so I'm looking forward to you picking your time so that we can have more time for the discussions at the end of this session. Sadia, please. Sadia, you're muted. I see you, but you're muted. I don't know whether you are hearing us.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're welcome.
Thank you. My email, my net today is not very good, unreliable. So if I get, I'm seem to be going.
You seem to be going on and off, but for now you are just muted, which may be the problem. But yeah, if you are hearing us, can you unmute and try?
You hear me now?
Yes, we hear you now.
Should I start the video?
Okay, try. If it might weaken your connection, but it's nice to see your face.
Because I have a very, I don't know, for whatever reason today, I have a very bad connection. So it's going on and off. Anyway, I like the article and thanks for Saverio to really capture some of these issues. But for me, more of the issues are internal. While you have got the general things that we are looking at, there is also the most marginal group is in terms of production, primary production. Pastoralists are having the worst scenario most of the time because of the policies of our governments and whoever is doing the work. Because it doesn't seem to be really planned well. The pastoralists have got their own planning well, but if they don't have policies are not helping. I'm sorry, I will going to be off the camera because it's giving me a hard time.
Yeah, I think that will help. Yes.
It really has got a problem for me. The biggest problem of all is that the issue of policies that we are using in terms of developing pastoralism or even helping them in terms of the development. And one of the problems they have is most governments, whoever they are, or international actors, and everybody seem to be undermining in terms of, and sometimes it just become because of the traditional politicians that we have, the border issues, cross-border issues, quite a good number of issues are really becoming a factor that's really affecting their livelihoods. And for me, one of the problems is we have poor policies and strategies that govern range management. Land tenure systems are already problematic. And cross-border encounters, sometimes irregular taxation, they can be taxed in Ethiopia. I'm talking about my experience in Somaliland, Somalia, Ethiopia, for example. They can be taxed in Ethiopia and then again in Somaliland. And impact of conflicts also is another problem. Poor management of natural resources, both them because of this charcoal burning, of the issues of biodiversity loss and things like that is really becoming. And then we also have got the demographic changes now because both livestock and the human and the population are increasing. And it's also creating a bit of stress in terms of the land because they cannot move. The mobility issue is being completely undermined because they're not freely moving anymore because the land is becoming owned by other groups and their ability to move more than 50 kilometers are usually very hard to have that. So the mobility is becoming an issue. And the other things they have to learn is the territoriality and restrictions on mobility is what I'm saying, both in terms of land, in terms of grazing, as well as issues of land. There's also another problem, which is there's no lack of demarcation between agriculture or crop production and pastoral issues. Crop production seems to be expanding and encroaching completely on the rangelands. And there's no policy that's stopping.
I don't want to stop you, Sadia, but yes. I need you to push because your time is up, really.
Okay, so it's done.
Yeah, just conclude. No, just conclude, please.
Okay, let me conclude. So for me, the internal factors as well as external factors are both disadvantaging pastoralists in general. And if you want to do something, really some work on this one, we need to really look at both in the international policies as well as local and national policies in everywhere so that we can support pastoralism in a manner in which it becomes progressive the way they are doing it. But at the moment, with climate change coming in, with all the other factors coming in, it's really problematic. So that's one of my, I can come back later, but okay.
Thank you very much, Sadia. This is the first time I've had you finish a presentation without bringing gender on board, but I'm sure you'll do that when you.
No, but I was not looking it. I was not looking it seriously on the. I look at the human factor in my paper, in my briefing, because pastoralists, you have to look at the human readiness that becomes gender issues and things like that will come there. But as I have got only 3 minutes, I cannot cover, and I was looking at the general picture of it.
Thank you very much. Abdul Kadir, you are next.
But I can bring it on. Hello, can you hear me?
Abdul Kadir, are you with us?
Yes. Can I go on? Can I go on, Michael?
Yes, please do.
Okay. I want to thank all those who are involved, particularly GIZ, the German government, CELEP, of course, Michael, and the presenter, Saverio. I was trying to put up to look into the loopholes of the paper. But when Saverio made the presentation, he blew it on my face, the whole thing, you know. For example, I was saying that, you know, there should be an introduction about pastoralism because the audience, are you following me, Michael?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes, okay, great. I was of the notion that since the paper can go into hands of people who don't know about pastoralism, why should there not be a brief introduction about pastoralism, the livelihood system, before going into the bigger context and perspective? But during the presentation, exactly that is what Saverio did. I hope he can readjust the paper according to his presentation. I really appreciate Saverio for continuing to put pastoralism into perspective for non-pastoralist actors and our brothers in the north. He has done this many times and from different, you know, sources of information in the African context, in the European context. And we are learning a lot through participating in his presentation and all his works. Having said that, let me come back to the paper. I have the notion that starting with climate change from global perspective steals the spotlight from pastoralism and food production. If you look at the paper immediately, you will think of global climate change issue. Instead, I was proposing that the goal of a paragraph should be brought from the second page, which is very nice, articulated and put in front, which states the goal of this brief. The other issue I would like to raise is there is also the customary social organization is well articulated, but it's only seen from operational perspective. These same institutions serve as traditional governance structure, both for the usage of natural resources and peaceful coexistence, as far as, you know, traveling or crossing many geographical boundaries. So I think that also should be a little bit expounded or, you know, put into perspective where some pastoralists in Africa can cross 5 to 6 countries, and it is part of the resilience of pastoralism. I don't know whether we can say that the other resources, pastoralists, they produce food in terms of livestock, milk, meat, and other livestock sources. But the area where pastoralists inhabit also have other types of resources, minerals and other underground resources. Can we consider that as a source of income which can be turned into food purchase or food access? So I was thinking of this, and I think if I have said this, I can wait for another turn and come back if I have any other points.
Thank you very much, Kadir. And thank you for not making it necessary for me to stop you. I think the next presenter is Shoba. Shoba, are you ready? And please.
I don't know whether it is good evening for everybody, but hello all. Thank you for the opportunity. I've interacted with the paper, but not to the full. And in some areas, some terminologies were hard for me. But if I may put my comment, I think all of us should be aware that pastoralism has kept most of us alive until now. Whether climate change or not, we have lived with this. Whether there is the introduction of sedentary or diversification of livelihood, pastoralism or keeping of livestock and animal has always kept us. And this is because in the area where most of the pastoralists live or get their livelihood, what supports that is pastoralism way of life, because we have short rainfall, unpredicted or even unreliable rainfall. So I concur with Saverio, especially on the movements, and if you can tell the movement of animals to kind of settled situation, it won't help much. That is what I wanted to say. And my sister also talked about conflict, though it is national or regional. Most of the areas where pastoralists live are associated with conflict, but these are man-made conflicts. Pastoralists used to relate to each other and even borrow each other in case of needs. But because the governance institution has been reduced almost to no power, this has caused a lot of friction and fighting between the pastoralists themselves. And then proliferation of small arm or short guns has contributed to this. So if there are objective way of handling all these issues, I think what the presenter presented will sustain the livelihood of pastoralists. And maybe I'll also talk about the interest, the use of land by many other interest groups. We have like Northern Rangeland users advocating for conservancies. And in some community, especially the community that I come from, the Borana, are known for conservancies. So we have always coexisted with the animals, with our animals, with the wildlife. And because of this interest from all the users in the pastoral community, this has also increased the conflict in the area, and especially even within the community themselves, because these other users will also come with the ideology that you are conserving the rangelands, and so you don't need to do ABCD, while the community know in terms of their governance, they know where to graze, they know the fallback areas. And because of all this interest groups and different users in pastoral area, there has been a lot of issues that the common pastoralist will always not understand. Lastly, what I'm saying is, especially in Kenyan setting, we have opportunity for community land, to register community land. And if we are able to secure that, I think we'll continue with our way of life, and that is pastoralism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shoba. I mean, it's quite clear, as you say, that a lot of challenges, both external and internal, are at play that bring tension with the potential that Saverio identifies for pastoralism to help manage climate change. And I'm sure more of these ideas are going to come up. Hussein Wario, you are next.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Saverio, for the good brief and the presentation. The brief provides vital directions for development, within the dryland landscape. It surely contributes to the current growing voices that reaffirms the viability of pastoral production system, despite the various challenges it continues to face. As the brief suggests or points out, pastoralists as professionals in dealing with uncertainty, and that pastoralism is an important system that contributes not only to local livelihoods, but national economies, and offers lessons for resilience. We see that pastoral producers, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, have been convinced otherwise. This notion that the system is worthless and needs to be replaced has gotten into them, and it has sort of dampened their spirits, because actually also the promoters of this kind of narrative are powerful actors, with resources, especially led by our governments. Therefore, one of the things that needs to happen, while implementing such a brief is the need to make the pastoralists actually believe in themselves all over again, that what they're doing is actually worthwhile and a viable livelihood system. And also, the brief importantly emphasizes the centrality of mobility in pastoral production system, and that the resilience depends on it. The practice, however, is one of the mostly threatened by various challenges, as also pointed out by the different speakers. And it's particularly due to the persistent misconceptions, and it lacks support from governments or agencies working in pastoralism. However, despite these limitations, we could see that the pastoralists are modifying these practices. They're using applications or implements such as motorcycles, cell phones. They're using trucks, to aid themselves in mobility. And this shows the dynamism that is there within the pastoral systems in maintaining these adaptive practice. We can see also at the regional level, especially the African regional level, the outlook in terms of policy support is encouraging, but we could see that adoption by various states is not commensurate to this. And this is an area I think needs focus from ourselves. Lastly, the recommendation on small-scale rain-fed agriculture by the brief, from the onset, I think it should be made very clear, as it has been done also in the presentation, that pastoralism is an integral part of it. And I'm saying this because due to previous prejudice against pastoralism, the term rain-fed agriculture has attained direct connotation with cropping. So if not very clarified, it can make the brief to be misconstrued to mean that cropping is what is promoted. So with that, I say thank you very much. And the brief is an important contribution to strengthen focus on pastoralism for ourselves and various actors in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hussein, and thank you very much for keeping within time. The next presenter is Veronique, and I expect those are her slides coming up. Veronique.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Veronique, please go on.
Okay. Then, good afternoon, everyone. And first, let me thank the organizers for commissioning this very relevant brief and for inviting me today, and also on behalf of all of those who work on pastoralism in FAO. And from my hand, I would like to make 2 points. First, the brief written by Saverio answers the question perfectly, in my view. The brief goes as far as possible within the framework it was given. by emphasizing the role of non-climate stressors, tying numerous evidences nicely together, and integrating non-climate stressors in depicting the socio-ecological resilience of pastoralism is as necessary as is a description of the internal properties of these systems. As a policy brief, the final version might expand the political context of relevance of the pastoral mobility further, as it could help in the next step. For example, the label of transhumance-related conflicts puts pastoralists at the forefront in many pieces of literature of these times. But these conflicts could alternatively be labeled as land fragmentation and enclosures-related conflicts, thereby addressing land policy's responsibilities. And second point, we need to reconsider the question the paper is answering to. In my view, the limitations of the paper lie in the way the question was framed around resilience. We may stretch the notion of resilience and the external limits of the systems as much as we want. But basically, the notion of resilience leaves out of the picture the social changes as well as the political responsibilities when it comes to address not only climate change, but also insecurity, dispossession, vulnerability, or inequalities on the way to sustainable pastoral livelihood. Political economics and political ecology address the long-lasting effects of exports from subsidized and industrialized systems towards countries with extensive and no subsidized systems. The effects of land fragmentation and enclosures, of local insurrection and growing inequalities impacting rural areas and many pastoral populations nowadays. Actually, I'm convinced that this literature would help reframing the ways forward for policies of goodwill by naming capitalism by its name. So, thank you. Happy to contribute more.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. It's really nice that you brought out the issue of the social and the political dimension, the political economy issues. That speaks directly to some of the points made by Sadia, by Shoba, and by Hussein. And it is important for us to come back to that conversation, because unless those are addressed, what Saverio very well described doesn't get to work because of what's coming from outside of that system, and that needs to be discussed. But this session, this part of this conversation will end with the intervention by Dr. Camilla Trullman. So Camilla, you're welcome.
Hi, very nice to see lots of old and new friends. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for asking me to join this webinar. And thank you also, Saverio, and your co-authors for this excellent paper. I think it makes a very clear case for learning about the value of mobility, flexibility, diversity as a means to build resilient livelihood systems in the face of climate change, and learning especially from the pastoral context. I want to draw from my own research over 40 years in central Mali to emphasize the critical role of non-climate stressors, as also well described by Sadia Ahmed and Véronique Ancy. I think the brief rightly notes that it's the non-climate factors which either help or hinder effective adaptation and resilience. And never was that more true than for that part of the Ségou region which lies north of the River Niger in central Mali. Here, as I show in my recent book, a little bit of advertising here, Land Investment and Migration, land which had been in abundant supply supporting a combination of dryland farmers, agro-pastoralists, and long-distance transhuman herders, has witnessed a complete breakdown in viability. So what has caused this breakdown over the last 15 years? Well, it's got nothing to do with climate change, which, if anything, has brought higher rainfall to the area. It's all about governance, governance of land and water. In 2009, a large-scale land grant was made by the government of Mali to a Chinese company for irrigated sugarcane on what had been the farm and grazing lands of a number of villages. Irrigation water has flooded their settlements, and agricultural chemicals have poisoned their water supplies. So each June, hundreds of people set off northwards looking for land and clearing new fields from former pasture areas. Local agro-pastoralists have found themselves increasingly edged out of areas that they considered theirs, and relationships between Pearl, Fulani herders, and Bambara farmers have broken down completely. Long-distance transhumant herders seeking passage across the River Niger at Markala Bridge have also found themselves in trouble. They're now tightly hedged in for days at a time, waiting in a long queue for several kilometers for their turn to cross the bridge. They're unable to water or graze their animals on land along the roadside because they fear fines and confiscation by the sugar plantation security staff. A total absence of government engagement at local, regional, or national level has compounded the difficulties. No attempt was made to sit down and work out how to pay compensation for the loss of land, how to negotiate new realities, find new complementarities, or seek better integration of people and livelihoods across this wide area. Over the last 6 months, a series of battles between jihadist groups loyal to JNIM and local villagers have led to the submission of most of this entire region to this jihadist group. JNIM has been very successful in recruiting young men from the pastoral Pearl community because their interests have been so damaged and marginalized over recent years. In many areas, farmers have been forbidden by armed men to cultivate any land on pain of death. So farming villages now have empty granaries. There's been no millet to harvest this year. Many settlements have emptied out this autumn as everybody needs to go wherever they can to find food and income to pass the long dry season until they can find out whether they'll be allowed to cultivate next rainy season. I give you this example because it illustrates so well the points made in this brief. A situation of mutual respect, complementarity, negotiation, and living with variability has been hideously transformed into one of killings, conflict, and communities set against each other. I hope the widespread understanding of the content of this brief means that this will not be the face of the future across all of dryland Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. And thanks. It's good to know that that book is out and the advertisement worked well. So looking forward to getting our copies. Welcome, everyone. We're now going to the discussion session. I see that a number of people have posted questions in the Q&A, but you will have noticed from Saverio's presentation that he's looking forward to feedback from you on what will enable him to complete this brief in a manner that responds to all the issues that we think should be put there. So in as much as Saverio will answer questions, you are hoping that we are not going to have a Q&A session, but rather that we're going to have discussions with people making their inputs on where they see the gaps, where they see the strengths, what they think can be brought in to help strengthen this. The issue here is, for a long time, we've talked about pastoralists living with variability, and variability was looked at as a constraining factor. And it was posed questions about how to cope with the variability that characterizes the arid and semi-arid lands. And now we have come to a situation where variability is not just an issue that pastoralists are faced with, but it's the whole global system is faced with variability. And the key issue here is the lessons that pastoralism, in terms of their practice as a land use system and as a livelihood system, offers for dealing with variability generally and also specifically in the context of climate change. And it's looking at what lessons pastoralist practices around mobility, flexibility, diversity, complementarity, negotiation, and so on, how those practices can be integrated into a response to the challenges that we face. But I think as we talk about that, we also have to go back to Abdul Qadir's concern. I think he said, maybe when we put this in the context of global climate change, we may borrow these ideas and then pastoralists themselves will lose from this because we remove the emphasis from a group that has all along been struggling with being marginalized from the center of mainstream discourses. So we are now opening this for feedback. I think what we shall do is you raise your hand and we'll give you a chance to speak, and we'll see, we have 30 minutes or so of this, and we'll see how much we are able to cover with the time that we have. So if you have questions, but maybe as we're waiting for people to put up their hands, Saverio, you've been following the questions and the comments coming in. Do you have anything to say at this stage in response to what has been raised in the Q&A part?
Hi, Michael. Not especially. I'm much more curious to hear more from the participants. I think I've used my time for now, and I want to make sure that there is a as lively a discussion as possible from the participants before speaking again. Thank you.
Lovely. Who wants to go up first? Anthony, you are helping me to monitor if any hands are coming up so that we can give them a chance to intervene. Saverio, I don't see any hand up, but if you go to the Q&A session, you'll see that Lupa, if you're online, do you want to make the point you're making about extractive? Do you want to make that point directly? Lupa, are you online? I know Lupa also usually has problems with the connection from where he is. Are you there, Lupa? No, he isn't, at least not now.
I have the impression, I see two hands up, but I'm not sure whether I'm interpreting the screen correctly. I see two hands up from the attendees. I wouldn't know how to get there though. Anthony, can you help?
Yeah, sure. I'm chatting with Michael here. So there's Jerome Giff who asked a few questions and is raising his hand. He's allowed to talk. And Lupa is also able to talk.
Okay. I had tried to call Lupa before. So if Lupa is online, let him talk, then we'll have Professor Jeff who will speak. Lupa, are you online? Are you able to talk?
Yep. Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Lupa. We are asking people to be as brief as possible so that we get as many people on board as possible. So Karibu.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I wrote something on extractives, and the extractive sector has become one of the next sensitive sector between pastoralists and the governments that are exploring resources. These examples can be raised in Kenya along the Turkana, whereby conflict-prone area is kind of affected so much in terms of cattle raids and so on, but the government is busy doing the extraction of minerals without caring about the conflict situation around that area. An example also here in Uganda, where I come from, in Karamoja, there are cattle raids and theft taking place in huge numbers, but government is busy making sure that the sites that are being used for extraction, they are protected more than the communities or more than the pastoralists against conflicts. So that's why I was bringing the point into that conflicts and extractives are also now a common future that needs to be addressed. And this could be also linked to climate change factors. Why are people fighting each other because of ABCD issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Lupa. Yes, I think the extractives issue is relevant in the sense that some of these extractives take huge areas of land. They block, livestock migration corridors, and there are also issues of land rights within and between communities. So that's definitely something we need to think about, and what the impact of that is on getting, on enabling the system to work or constraining it from working. Professor Jeffu, do you want to make your intervention?
Yes, please. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see all of you, especially Camila and Sadia and the rest. The issue I'd like to raise has been tangentially raised by Camila, Soba, and Sadia. And the crux of the matter, which has snowballed into all kinds of conflicts between the pastoralist and the sedentary farmer, is land governance, land use systems in different communities where the pastoralists exist. It has become an endemic problem, especially where I have extensive experience in West Africa. The conflict has snowballed into a lot of political and livelihood losses of the pastoralists. Very little is done to improve the livelihoods of the pastoralists in terms of adequate and relevant policies that will engender, intensification of production. The issue I'm trying to raise now is, what is the future of pastoralism? Pastoralism has a future if and where it is practiced the way it is done in the extensive system? I'm tempted to say the answer is in the negative, because conflicts all over the world, especially in the Horn of Africa and in sub-Saharan Africa, has been depicted to be on the increase. Our new book, which we did for the UNECA, called New Fringe Pastoralism, explicitly states all these issues, and it has become more of a problem. In fact, it has escalated beyond what we saw in the later in 2016, 2017. And I think we have to say something about how we can arrest the conflict, which is becoming very worrisome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we had, I have seen on the Q&A questions from Andre and Ikshan. In the absence of any hand up, is either of them available to speak to their points? Ikshan, are you with us? Can't hear from him. Andre Marine?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Thanks. I didn't count on saying this out loud, but I'll try to formulate. My question relates to this idea of destocking and the whole earlier discussion, maybe in the 90s, mid-90s and so on, about preemptive destocking as a strategy as a kind of tracking variability strategy. I'm not familiar with to what extent. I work mostly in East Asia, in Mongolia, and a little bit in Europe. And here issues of destocking are not so prominent, but I wonder in the region that the policy brief covers, is destocking still seen as a strategy, as a relevant strategy against climate change related problems and so on?
Okay, all right. Saverio is making note of that and the others will be able to respond. Anne informs me that Anna has her hand up. For some reason, I don't see these hands up. Anna, are you able to? Yes.
Michael Zirsan, I was just allowed to speak now.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you. I have a short question for Saverio. My concern is, and I hope he does it, is to unpack what he means by mobility, because in some pastoral systems, yes, you can move with the aid of trucks over thousands of kilometers, but in some pastoral systems, which I also consider mobile pastoral systems, movement can only be over tens of kilometers. So what would be the, criteria for when you consider a system being a mobile system? Because that sort of just needs to be unpacked, because some people understand that if you don't move over large distances, spatial scales, that you are a sedentary system. So maybe just some clarity what he means by a mobile system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ikshan. Saverio, your hand is up. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Great. Let me start from talking about mobility. Thank you so much, Ikshan, for prompting me to talk about this. It is indeed a very huge issue, and I'm told to switch my video on. And yes, I think that I want to say two things. The first one is that what really matters is the capacity to move at the same pace as nature. And that doesn't necessarily, doesn't end with mobility. No? It is about the capacity to embed variability in the processes of the system, no? In the operational processes of the system. Mobility is one of the several dimensions that are used in pastoral systems. There are institutional dimensions, there are a procedural dimension. It has to do with the variability within the herds and so on. So yes, mobility is important, is pivotal, it's not the only one. And that takes me to the second point, which is that for many years, pastoralists have been told that being mobile is not a very good thing to be. And they have learned that if they want attention from projects, from governments, they have to present themselves as not so mobile. At the same time, the governments also have a very strong tradition to highlight sedentarity over mobility. So there is an underrepresentation of mobility out there and an overrepresentation of sedentarity in the context of pastoral development. Where people who often move for most part of the year are described as a sedentary or sometimes a semi-sedentary, and all those huge variety of nuances in the classification, just because a few members of the family or some members of the family or even half of the family lives for some time of the year in a village. So definitely, tens of kilometers or thousands of kilometers, that's not the point. The point is mobility used to match the variability in the inputs from the natural environment being used? If so, well, that's pastoral mobility. It doesn't really matter how many kilometers, how often, and so on. It is the function that matters. It's not the intensity or the scale. With regard to Andrei's question, I'm afraid I don't really know whether I have a good answer for this question. And I understand that there are still talks about destocking, certainly in certain contexts, especially humanitarian interventions. Destocking seems to be still treated with a certain degree of respect. I presume that, as often in these cases, being a fairly technical question, it really depends on the case-by-case situation. On the issue of future raised by Jerome Jeffu, I completely agree on all the things that are being said about land governance and so on. Let me start with that. And of course, I see that as a declinations on the topic that non-climate stressors are really what is creating the difficulty in the pastoral context. And somehow we have to be aware and careful that climate change and the discourse that has been created around climate change is having what I can only describe as a cognitive impact. You know, is undermining the understanding of the situation by painting everything as a matter of natural causes, when in reality the natural events are there, but whether they translate or not into a problem for people depends very much on non-natural causes. And the future of pastoralism, what is the future of pastoralism is always a question that comes out in all these webinars. I have recently come across, I think my best answer is that I have recently come across a quote in an IPCC report, actually, from a French writer, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And he seems to be really somehow have been visionary on this. And he says about the future, what the task is not to predict it. The task is to make it possible. And I think that pastoral development, it's about time that the pastoral development starts to look at pastoralism in this light, not guessing what the future of pastoralism might be. It's not the stock trade. It's something else. We're dealing with people, and people are there, and they have a right livelihood. And the task is to make the future of pastoralism possible.
Thank you very much, Saverio. At some point, you need to address all these questions about how do people get hold of the brief, but you'll do that in your next intervention, because I have Anna Rengifo. Anna, your hand has been up. For some reason, I can't see it, but we'll have Anna, and then after her, we'll have Fadi. Anna, if you're online, please make your contribution. Anna Rengifo Abad, are you able to hear us?
Gefu can hear you very well.
Who can hear me very well? Anna?
Yeah, Jerome Gefu, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, Jerome, I can hear you too, but this Anna had her hand up, but she doesn't seem to be hearing us. What about Fadi? Fadi Segfro, are you able to hear us? Yes, Fadi, I see your hand up. Are you able to please make your intervention?
Hello, anybody hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Is it clear for you now?
Yes, we can hear you, Fadi. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you so much about your valuable presentation, valuable in knowledge you have owned. So my question is, or my insight is, whenever we're speaking about the global warming and the climate changes and the pastoral movement along the world and the Africa as well. So why the African continent working in a very several colonies, separate colonies, very separately? I don't know. I know that there are a lot of advocacies that collecting voices regarding the climate change. And we are in Egypt also. We will host the next COP of 27 COP in Egypt, but the actions are not concrete. The actions are not seen anymore. So also, whenever we're speaking about the institutionalization and the economic crisis we faced in all over the world due to the COVID-19 circumstances, why we do not have a single voice, single constitution, single institutional, what should I say, agree for this topic of making the pastoralism more resilience, more mobile as mobile phones or something like that, more resilience. I mean, in the African continent. So I would like you to raise it. I would like to raise it with the African Union, with conferences, educational conferences, university, academic applications. I don't know how can we do it, but I think that we need to not work in a separate colonies. It's time for action, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fadi. A very, very important question, and a question that I hope that Saverio may have something to say too, and to somehow get into the brief. As you may know, the African Union adopted the pastoralist policy framework, which I guess at the policy level would be the best attempt to speak in one voice. But of course, after adopting the policy framework, the challenge is in having it mainstreamed in national policies and informing strategies and interventions. And there will be, I think, opportunity for people to speak to this at some point. Sadia, your hand has been up, and since I can't get Anna, can I allow you to speak? Can we have Sadia?
Yeah, I'm a bit disadvantaged because my net is going on and off. Anyway, I would like to bring one issue, which is the labor exit from pastoral areas. People, the young people everywhere seem to be moving, or at least because there's no education. I think as the lifestyles are changing and people's ambitions are again changing, we are not looking at the social service aspects of it, both of the gender, and if you look at it, the human factor of it, we're not developing the right policies and the right infrastructure on the ground.
Sorry, we seem to have lost Sadia. Is there any other hand up? Since I can't see the hands, I'm requesting Anne and Timon, who seem to be able to see them, to please let me know if there's any hand up.
I don't see any right now, Michael.
All right, thank you. Is there, can we get any hands up? Saverio says he missed most of the questions from Fadi. But Saverio, Fadi was saying he doesn't understand why on these issues about pastoralism and pastoralist development, there are so many different voices coming from different directions. And he was speaking specifically about the situation of pastoralism in Africa, asking why is it that when we talk about pastoralism in Africa, we are not talking with one voice, and how do we get, and he says that should be raised with the African Union and other interested frameworks to ensure that people speak with one voice. And before you react to that, I see Anna Rengifo is now appearing. Anna, are you able to raise your point? You are muted. Anna Rengifo Abad, if you're able to speak, please make your point now.
There's another question in the Q&A from Sabine Dürlichter.
Sabine, would you be able to speak to your question live?
Sabine? Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Please.
everyone. Yes, my question was somehow in regard to GIZ, who commissioned the work done by Saverio and others. So I would like to know in how far this paper, this brief will somehow used in the policy dialogue or within GIZ, within the with regard to the policy dialogue with BMZ or beyond, knowing that, for example, in Ethiopia, there is a GIZ supported project on land access and somehow organizing land issues with regard to investors. We have, for example, in the past taken note that, for example, the interests of pastoralists have never been addressed at all within this project. So I'm wondering in how far, the whole issue of taking into account pastoralists as an important kind of land users for those economies can really be a cross-cutting issues in all kinds of project concepts in the bilateral cooperation. So maybe the colleague from GIZ could give some information on what is intended with the paper in the near future. Thank you.
Okay,
Tobias,
Michael,
can you
may I?
speak to that? Yes.
Yes, I
please
can
go
try.
ahead.
I can try. Okay. Thank you, Sabine, for raising this question. I think this goes also into the direction of many questions in the chat when this brief can be accessed and where exactly. Still, I want to highlight and point out that we are talking about a draft version, a very advanced draft version. So all the feedback that was raised now within the last 1 hour and a half will go into the final version, and we try to complete this brief within the next couple of, let's say, weeks or so, probably month. There is a challenge, of course, because we have already seen that we all know that it is a very complex topic, and there was also already a feedback from, I think it was Shoba, telling that some terminologies are not so common and it's difficult to understand. So we really have to ask the questions to who we want to address this policy brief. Is this our government? Is this government policymakers in our partner countries? Is this our project, our colleagues within GIZ? And depending on the pre-knowledge, I would say, we still need to add more information. Some will need some basic information on pastoralism, others know already, and they say, okay, this brief is already quite complex. We should reduce it to some very key messages that really brings it on the point. So this will be something still to be discussed within our group of people here in GIZ who commissioned this policy brief. When we are at the point that we can really publish it, hopefully also with the help of organizations like CELEP or DZG, and I really want to also thank you for making this possible to facilitate this event now. We will let you know. Streamlining pastoralism, making this really a cost-cutting topic for all our projects, this would be something I really would desire. I wish, probably, it's also a dream, because I mentioned in the beginning that there are many different interests also within GIZ, within German Development Cooperation. Some people, don't see the value of pastoral systems, of pastoralism. Others simply don't know because information is lacking. And this is something we can do, I can do, at least as a small step, to inform the people, to make them aware of the importance and that they have to count on pastoralism also for the future. It's not something from the past, but it will continue. This brief and all other publications on this topic can add step by step to a better understanding of pastoralism, of pastoral systems, of pastoral societies, and needs of pastoral target groups. And this is what I can say at this point.
Thank you very much, Tobias. I think what you say about the complications just within GIZ is part answer to Fadi's question about why there doesn't seem to be one voice. There are so many interested issues. There are so many issues at stake when you talk about pastoralism. You talk about land governance, you talk about hydrocarbons, you talk about infrastructure development, talking about climate change, you're talking about conflict. There's so many different people coming from different angles. So it's not surprising that it is often very difficult to get a common voice. But I think what is important about this kind of brief is for me, what is really important about this is that in a sense, I get the feeling that science has always been part of the problem in discussing pastoralist livelihood. So the solution has to come from science. And the good thing about this is that it's using science, the entry point for having this conversation. We're actually coming to the end of the timing for this, but Haruna Abachi has had her hand up for a while. Haruna, would you be able to intervene now before we close the webinar?
Ok, merci beaucoup. Et je vous remercie vraiment pour cet événement-là. Là, c'est vraiment très intéressant, même si je n'ai pas beaucoup compris puisque il y avait un problème de langue. Alors, je pense que le pastoralisme et les changements climatiques constituent un thème du moment. Et cet événement devrait être beaucoup observé au Sahel parce que le Sahel constitue quand même une zone fragile. Il est véritablement fragile. Je sais que Sergio en sait quelque chose puisque je sais qu'il a fait la zone de Bermo. Il a vu comment vivent les populations éleveurs. Et là, il y a d'autres espaces beaucoup plus vulnérables. Et là, des réflexions sont quand même beaucoup plus utiles ici pour pouvoir, en tout cas, s'enrichir de ce qui se passe, de comment les éleveurs transhumants s'adaptent, comment ils essaient, en tout cas, de concilier l'insécurité, les changements climatiques, le Covid-19, mais aussi la limitation des mouvements en zone côtière. Parce que il le sait très bien, tous les éleveurs du Nord, lorsque ça ne va pas, ils descendent au Sud. Donc, c'est le Bénin, c'est le Nigeria, c'est le Burkina. Donc, c'est cette situation-là que je voulais vraiment partager avec vous, puisque vous dites que il n'est pas loin de l'heure, je ne vais pas vous retenir seulement. Il faut peut-être, pour essayer de s'enrichir de nos expériences respectives, peut-être tenir compte de nos spécificités, notamment la langue, mais aussi la zone Sahel. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Haruna, but that's the end of my French. Antonio, are you going to provide a brief summary of what Haruna just said? Or any other person able to provide a summary for those who, like me,
I can do it.
Hear what he said? Yes, Saverio.
Yes, thank you, Haruna. It was very nice to hear from you again. Haruna basically said that beyond the general argument in the brief, we should not lose sight of the situation, of the current situation in the Sahel, where the daily task is to try to reconcile not only climate change, but climate change, conflict, and the ongoing increasing limitations to mobility, and the work that is being done in the area around these issues. And I cannot avoid thinking in this case of the recent colloque in Chad that has been held precisely on the issues concerning the reconciliation of the agropastoral, what they call the agropastoral region, which means the region that is used by both specialist pastoralists and specialist farmers. So that's what he said, Michael.
Thank you very much. And I think what Haruna says is just what comes to my mind as he's talking is that there are real opportunities for linking up pastoralists in Western Africa and pastoralists in Eastern Africa, Southern and North, to build on the experiences coming from each of these regions to address some of these challenges. And I think that is also a unique thing about this brief. I mean, since the GIZ is behind it and GIZ is working in both, on both sides of the continent, there's a huge opportunity there, I think. I think we have to go now. Our time is up. This has been very useful. I believe that Saverio has gotten quite a lot of input that he'll be able to use to finalize the brief. And we are all looking forward to engaging with the brief and the process that follow after that. Thank you all very much. It's been great having you all on board. Yeah. Bye-bye. Camilla, nice to see you. Been a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.